Good afternoon. On behalf of Keep America Beautiful and our 700 national affiliates, I would like to thank you for joining us today for our conversation, How Litter-Free Initiatives Build Community Understanding and Shared Values. As the nation's largest community improvement organization, Keep America believes in the shared responsibility to build and maintain clean, green, and beautiful spaces. That's why we take action every day to beautify and unify communities across America. Through collective impact, we can ensure that everyone in America lives in a clean, green, and beautiful community. Our Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Study and our latest landmark research study, it estimates that there are 50 billion pieces of litter along America's roadways and waterways at the time that the study was conducted. We invite you to download the study at www.kab.org/litter study to learn more. While 50 billion pieces of litter is a significant problem, we estimate that the number equates to about 152 pieces of litter for every US resident. 152 pieces of litter is still a lot, but it is a solvable number. Working together and engaging all Americans, we can solve this problem and more. Today, we are joined by Dr. Michelle Kondo. Dr. Kondo is a research social scientist with the USDA Forest Service stationed in Philadelphia, PA. She holds academic degrees in civil engineering and urban planning and obtained postdoctoral training in epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania. Her research examines nature-based and place-based strategies and clinical interventions for disease, violence, and injury prevention with a focus on underserved urban communities. Jeremy Kranowitz is CEO and president of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, working to make Indy a more vibrant and beautiful place to live, work, and play. Jeremy has 25 years of experience launching multi-stakeholder coalitions to address climate change, food loss and waste, clean air and water, and sustainable forestry. He was executive director of Sustainable America, a nonprofit dedicated to sustainable food and fuel systems. He founded the Further with Food Coalition to combat wasted food and hunger. He conceived the Youth Policy Summit, a student negotiation training program at the Keystone Center. Jeremy has an MS and a BA from Johns Hopkins and an MPA from New York University. And lastly, but not least, Dr. Mark Zimmerman is the director of the Prevention Research Center of Michigan and the CDC-funded Youth Violence Prevention Center. Dr. Zimmerman's research focuses on adolescent health and resiliency and empowerment theory. His work on adolescent health examines how positive factors in adolescents' lives help them overcome the risk they face. He's the editor of Youth and Society, a member of the editorial board for Health Education Research, and editor emeritus of Health Education and Behavior. We're so excited to hold this conversation. Q&A will be held at the end. Please share your questions for the panelists in the chat box. Without further ado, allow me to introduce our moderator, Jacqueline Grace, Chief Development Officer at Keep America Beautiful, to start the panel.
Thank you, Ava. I'd like to highlight that Keep America Beautiful has been cleaning and greening America for the last 6 decades and really has been at the forefront of addressing litter and mismanaged waste in thousands of communities across the nation. As some of you know, Keep America Beautiful is currently taking steps to bring more of its programming to more communities and really to more diverse communities with a very definitive goal of cleaning and greening America. In today's session, we seek to understand how litter impacts our lives and our communities in very visible and not so visible ways. Solving the problems of litter and issues related to litter can truly provide significant community benefits, and we understand that, but they extend well beyond the litter itself. And so we've asked our panelists to join us and to really explore this idea of how cleaning and greening activities can lead to more engaged and inclusive and really thriving communities. So with that, Michelle, Jeremy, Mark, thank you for joining us today. Thank you. As you heard, Keep America Beautiful and its 700 affiliates are taking action every single day to clean and green America. And I'd like to start with a 2-part question, giving you each about 3 to 4 minutes to answer. I know that's not a lot of time. So we'll start here at the beginning. What are the problems that we are all looking to solve? What are the most significant issues that you are seeing in communities as they relate to cleaning and greening? And why do these matter? How do they impact the community? What are the impacts on the community? So I think we'll start with you, Mark.
Oh, okay. I'll lead off. I was going to say, oh, Jeremy, why don't you go? You're the guy who's on the front lines there. Well, for us, I think litter is sort of the beginning of the downward slope of at the end dumping and some of the really kind of negative things that happen in a lot of the urban centers. We work in Flint, Youngstown, and some in Camden, New Jersey, and we're working really with the sort of the structural consequences of redlining and other policies that have been in place that have created basically the ideas of the reverse industrial revolution, where a lot of industry was leaving in the north, in those three northern cities. GM had 70,000 jobs in the early 60s and is now 7,000 jobs. And so with that, many people leave. There's abandoned homes, abandoned properties. Those homes, some of those houses kind of become very dilapidated, very run down. Some of them are torn down by the city. And we work with land banks who are then charged with doing something about these abandoned properties. And there's a process for how the cities take back properties that have been in tax arrears for a very long time. So we're working really at that very extreme end of litter. It's more than litter on the streets. It might be appliances dumped on an empty lot, or just an overgrown lot, or construction materials dropped on that lot. And we're working with communities to really see what they do to ameliorate these issues and how that affects crime, affects mental health, affects their social interactions, their sense of community. And I'll just end. I'm not keeping track of my time, so I probably should shut up. But let me just say that that's just foreshadowing. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's just foreshadowing. The bottom line is these greening activities work to improve people's lives, to improve communities, and to reduce crime. So I'll just leave it at that and let my colleagues have some airtime.
Jeremy, why don't you jump in next? Thank you for that, Mark.
Sure, thanks. So, my perspective is solely on the city of Indianapolis. I would echo some of Mark's comments. For us, we started a new strategic plan at the beginning of this year. And one of the things that we are focusing on is viewing all of our work through a lens of environmental equity. And what we mean by that is understanding that there are different parts of the city that have more environmental benefits than others. To Mark's point, there are historical reasons such as redlining that created underinvestment in certain parts of the city that has continued into modern day. So there are a number of ways that we are thinking about these issues, and how do we think about how, from KIB's perspective, we can provide our resources and our contacts to improve the areas that need it and want it the most. Just at a large setting, we also are facing so many other crises that are going on at the same time. So we have to realize that we are addressing some of these issues during a global health crisis, during a crisis of concern about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, and also picking up on something that Mark mentioned, thinking about what some of the economic upheaval has been because of some of these recent changes. And so all of these things have impacts on the vibrancy of our communities and the work that we're trying to do to make cleaner and greener neighborhoods, and they are all interrelated. So making improvements in some areas, I think, will definitely have positive impacts elsewhere.
Thank you, Jeremy. Michelle.
Yeah, sure. So I can speak a little bit to some of the problems that we see associated with um, litter, and it's very much tied in cities like Philadelphia, where I am located, very much tied to vacancy, as Mark described. So vacant lots, properties in Philadelphia, they are often, we have something called short dumping. There's even a name for it. So often it's contractors dumping their construction debris, so, to avoid having to pay to dispose of it. And vacant lots in general, they sort of collect trash with the wind, or they often are hot spots for collecting trash, litter, refuse, things that people don't want to pay to get rid of. And we have seen in some of our studies that and measured and heard from nearby residents living next to these lots that it's stressful, that it provokes anxiety living near spaces that are filled with trash and weeds, and they looked unkept. So there are psychological impacts for nearby residents. So stress, anxiety, even perhaps depression. It can contribute to, it doesn't set up a very good environment for neighbor relations when there are, unkept spaces that are sort of spilling over and causing problems. And, there are these questions, well, whose fault is it? And who dumped that there? And, whose responsibility is it to clean that up? It's not mine. It's yours, or whose is it? So often we see that neighbors, people lack trust of one another when they are living in environments that are full of litter and look and appear to be uncared for. We also know in Philadelphia, speaking specifically from based on our research there, we did some observations. We involved some anthropologists, ethnographers to observe and sit in a couple of different neighborhoods around vacant lots. And we noticed that vacant spaces are involved in the drug trade in some neighborhoods of Philadelphia. So they serve as storefronts. It's clear that nobody's taking care of them or has ownership of them, and so they're sort of up for grabs. The signs on these lots say, it's who anybody can use this, and so we often see on blocks with a lot of vacant space that looks unkept that this is sort of valuable real estate in the narcotics trade. And we also know that vacant spaces, that people store weapons in cars parked in front of vacant spaces, vacant lots. And so, perhaps this is one of the pathways by which vacant land and all the things that go with it are involved and perhaps contribute to gun violence in cities. We also know that all the stuff that tends to accumulate on vacant land, it's prime mosquito habitat. So speaking about infectious disease, mosquitoes, what else? Other vectors. So rodents and things that carry things that carry pathogens that can be not great, healthy for humans. So we find mosquito abundance and counts and all of this to be very high in and around vacant spaces, unkept spaces that have collected a lot of refuse with, the collected water just creates beautiful habitat for those critters. And let's see what else. So thinking about infection. Well, how about children? Thinking about children. Vacant spaces full of trash and litter, and often it's drug use items, paraphernalia, not safe places for kids to play. So parents are keeping their kids indoors. Huge health impacts here. So all these things are and contribute to terrible health disparities, inequalities in health outcomes. They lead to pathways that are, um, it's not good. Let me say that.
That's really insightful and very helpful, Michelle. And I'm so interested in this in the impacts, particularly as they relate to the health and well-being of the community. And I'm wondering, Mark, is there anything that you want to add about this idea of these issues around litter being a catalyst or sort of a gateway to larger issues in the community?
Well, what I'd like to do, I think Michelle kind of did that. I want to, if you don't mind, spin it to what happens when you build it. I saw in the comments in the chat somebody mentioned, oh, this is not broken windows theory. We mentioned that briefly when we were talking about that the other day, and the idea of broken windows theory is that as bad things happen in a community, they tend to gain momentum. One broken window leads to another broken window, leads to more disorganization in the community, and then leads to more of the nefarious activities that Michelle was just talking about, maybe drug use, prostitution, dumping, and basically a disinvestment in those communities. So what we've done is we've tried to think about, well, what happens if you turn that on its head and say, what if you build it, will they come? Like the Field of Dreams. If you build it, will they come? If you improve it, will people start being on the street, interacting in more positive ways rather than blaming each other or not taking responsibility? And we have data where people said, well, I saw my neighbors working on this empty lot, so I kind of came out and wanted to help. Or I feel better now walking down my street because it's cleaned up. There's a doctoral student at the University of Connecticut that is working with Michelle, and they invited me to work with them. They found that, Michelle, I hope I'm not taking too much of your thunder here, but basically the quality of the property, we sent out people in the community, and we have about 7,000 properties where we have a coding system on litter, on the quality of the building. You know, is it paint chipping? Is it broken windows? Is it clean? Is it good landscaping? Is it mowed? Is there less litter? And what we find is the better the property is kept up, and these are in neighborhoods that have a lot of variation in terms of socioeconomic status and in terms of just all sorts of neighborhood indicators of basically crime and some of these negative things. And what we find, what she found was that if you live in a place where there's more properties that look nice, you are less fear of crime and better mental health. So I just want to spin it on to that side. The other side of that is the work that Keep America Beautiful has been doing for the last 60 years is hugely important for creating the kinds of places that people can thrive in. And I think that's really important. And Michelle, I hope that at some point you'll talk about the tree and canopy cover. It's not random where there is more or less tree cover in American cities, and tree cover is related to more positive outcomes. So I'll stop there. I don't know, I didn't directly answer your question, but I hope I, okay.
You led right into the next one, which is perfect. This is perfect. So Jeremy, maybe you jump in here and really talk about the solutions. What's working? What approaches are you taking? How do cleaning and greening activities really help to deliver both short-term and long-term results? And then how are you measuring? How are you measuring those results? What tools are you using? And Mark, we might circle back to you on that measure results question. But Jeremy, if you start, we'll go over to Michelle and then keep going.
Yeah, so we've been fortunate to have some capability within our staff to do some analysis, but we have pulled a number of different data sets to do an analysis. So I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks that we are looking at how do we improve environmental equity in the city of Indianapolis. And we actually divided the city into its census tract. And there are a number of different data sets that we were able to access. So one of them is some of our own data, but also Forest Service data and research done by the University of Vermont on tree canopy. So we are measuring tree canopy from which census tract has the least amount of trees and which has the most. We have litter data that we collect, that the city collects through a mayor's hotline, and that our transit authority also collects. And we're able to rank order where the litter is the most noticed per acre and where it is least. We also had other data from our local, from Indiana University, looking at social vulnerability and having that as a layer. And then a fourth layer was how much involvement KIB had done in those particular neighborhoods. And we were able to assess which parts of the city really were in need of the most help. And so therefore, that is directing us in our work to engage with those communities and develop more authentic relationships and work collectively. So not having us go to them, trying to parachute in and temporarily solve a problem, but co-create the table with the local community, whether that's with the leader of the local civic organization, or whether that's with the local faith leader, or just an influencer in that neighborhood, to try to build that up, and so that it is something that we're doing together. And then we can measure the difference that we're making over time, so that these litter complaints will hopefully decrease over time, and we'll be able to measure that impact so that we are truly making a more equitable city. So I'm really pleased about sort of that overall approach to these things. I will just also say that I know our Director of Public Works has just recently said that litter complaints are now outstripping all others on the mayor's complaint hotline. So more than potholes, more than anything else that people call into the mayor to complain about, litter is now #1 in Indianapolis anyway. So all the things that we can do to make a difference there, make a difference.
That's a very interesting detail. Michelle, can you chime in on what's working for you? What approaches are working, and how are you managing and measuring success?
Sure. Yeah, so I have been involved in a number of studies of solutions, and sometimes I call them interventions, that involve vacant space and everything that goes with that, the litter, the trash, the overgrown, weeds and vegetation. And so a couple of studies, and some that Mark, alluded to in Philadelphia, and then I have another in a couple of other cities going on, Youngstown, Ohio, and New Orleans. So we ran an experiment, as I think as Mark described, in Philadelphia, involving 600 vacant lots, and we assigned some of them to be treated, cleaned and greened, right? And some of them remained vacant. So those were the controls. And we compared before and after, crime rates, crime and violence. And we surveyed residents that lived near the homes and asked them about themselves, their families, their communities. And we found in this study that rates of crime and violence overall significantly decreased, and we saw especially higher rates of reduced gun violence, actually, near the cleaned and green vacant lots. And this is an intervention that is funded by the city, and it is done and conducted or managed by the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. or PHS in their land care program. So some very promising results there. And then looking at the surveys, people reported, we found a drop in levels of depression and as well as feelings of worthlessness, right? Which was interesting. And I should say in we also found, as Mark mentioned, an increase in reported amount of time spent outdoors. So this could be one of the mechanisms or pathways by which we're seeing lower crime rates after the intervention. And yeah, right, reduced fear of crime. So people feeling more safe to go out and about during the day and at night, actually. And yeah, so those were some promising findings. It was a true experiment and or randomized selection of all of the locations. We've done some other studies of other programs. So one in particular was in Youngstown, Ohio. They came to us and they had a program, a vacant lot clean and green program that had two different approaches. One, the sort of traditional, the contractor comes in, cleans and greens, cleans up everything and greens the lot, and then mowing every 2 weeks and cleaning up the trash. And then there was another that was, we call it a community reuse version or approach, where residents could apply themselves to take care of a lot. Often the lots were cleaned up and turned into gardens, community gardens or orchards. And so we studied both types of lots, what types of changes in crime was our main outcome there of interest. What types of changes did we see? And we found at the traditional contractor greened lots, we found more significant, sort of consistent decreases in property crimes. So theft, things like this. And as opposed to at the community reuse lots, where residents were taking care of and taking ownership of these vacant lots, we found property crime reductions as well as reductions in violent crimes. So which made us question, well, is there some element of this community engagement and ownership over the space, as opposed to contractors just coming in and quickly doing it themselves and then taking off, that could play a role in and or disrupt this violent crimes. So it's an important question, and I would say that the research that Mark Zimmerman here is leading in Michigan at the Youth Violence Prevention Center, and that I am supporting, is very much directed towards trying to untease and improve and gather more evidence there. We're wondering, is it community engagement really that is bringing about even more and better results there in communities.
Thank you, Michelle. Mark, would you like to add to that? Is there anything more that you can share about what's working, some of the research studies that you're conducting, something along those lines?
Yeah, well, we are pretty consistently finding that, and again, we're working in mostly disadvantaged neighborhoods that have been economically devastated by the decline of manufacturing in the northern cities. And we're finding that community engagement is a key component to it. We work with the Center for Community Progress, which is a national organization for land banks. And we work with land bank organizations, and they have all sorts of programs, both some that are literally, at least in Flint, they're called clean and green, where community organizations get a small amount of money. They have to cover about 25 empty lots, and they have to promise to mow them at least a little bit, I think 4 times over the summer. So basically care for them. A lot of those community organizations, however, do that on many of them, but then they also create community gardens or pocket parks. And I saw in the comments, somebody was asking about, what about creating community gardens and pocket parks? And absolutely something that community organizations do. That's a way to also build community. People can learn how to cook together, see what fresh fruits and vegetables are that they grow themselves. And importantly, some of the work that we're doing is engaging youth in the process, both in terms of paid employment, but also just working in the neighborhood is with the adults on these things. And that has a lot of benefits in terms of just helping kids connect with adults, because adults are still important in kids' lives, and helping adults understand that kids aren't just bags of problems that need to be controlled, but that they actually can be contributing as well. And our research is pointing all in the same kind of ways that Michelle is talking about, both quantitative and qualitative, control group designs, over and over and over again. We're finding support for the idea of busy streets, and that reusing empty lots helps create a busy street. And that's really important. I just want to say one other thing. I think somebody in the comments, I've actually been reading through the comments, believe it or not. I have a hard time usually doing Zoom and comment reading, but some people asked about arts. What about arts? And there are definitely, we're involved in a project right now looking at murals in the city of Detroit, and other and sculptures, even landscaping art. Not just clean landscape, but art, landscaping that was done by an artist. And I'm not talking about like, a bush becoming a dinosaur. I'm talking about like, almost using the flowers as a paintbrush. And we don't have the results of that yet, but preliminary looks at these data. I don't have the final data, but art matters too. That art, again, is sending the message that people care about this place. This is a nice place to be. And people are more willing to be outside. They're more willing to, trust each other, and it just makes for a better neighborhood. So anyway, I'll end it there. Let Jeremy kind of take maybe the next question.
That was really helpful. I'm particularly interested in this idea of unifying the community, and really looking at how these cleaning and greening events not only clean and green the environment, but also knit communities together. And so I'm wondering if you can each speak to that a little bit more, and add to that, what can our audience do to bring more cleaning and greening activities to their communities in a way that truly unifies people, that brings them together, that solves some issues around indifference or isolation or intolerance. And have you seen that in your work? And perhaps we start with you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I want to, I'm actually going to start with a quick little story that I was delighted to hear from the president of our city council, who was talking about taking his 96-year-old mother to church, and it was the same church she'd gone to her whole life. And the pastor at one point complained that there was litter in the neighborhood around the church and that the city wasn't doing its job. And so he said that he held his tongue, and afterwards drove his mother home, and on the way home said, "What would you have done in your day?" And she said, "What do you mean? We would have gone across the street and picked it up." And he said, "Right." So he dropped his mom off at home, drove back to church, went to the pastor and said, "You are my spiritual leader, but human to human, you're wrong. It is the city's responsibility, and it's our responsibility. And if, therefore, it's your responsibility to tell us that if we want to make the area around our church look nice, guess what? We've got a shared responsibility to make it look nice." So one of the things that I think we are doing a lot of in Indianapolis, and I think is replicable everywhere, is partnering with the faith community. In every major religion, either in sacred text or in religious practice, there is something about caring for the world around us. And rather than just sitting in a pew and listening to have somebody talk at you, to be out and living those ideals and engaging in activity that makes the community around our house of worship look better is rewarding in so many different ways. I can say that I've talked to faith leaders from a number of different backgrounds, and it's like pushing on an open door. I meet no resistance. Everybody says, of course, how do we work with you all to make something like that happen? The other thing that, so I'm actually really interested and engaged in trying to push pretty hard on making some things work, not just with one particular house of worship, but also on an interfaith basis, and how they can build community that way, and build mutual understanding and love for their community in all kinds of ways. The second thing is that we are partnering with our transit authority. And so in Indianapolis, we see a lot of littering that happens in and around bus stops and bus shelters. And we have engaged in a partnership with our transit authority to do a couple of things. One of which is that we're actually right now doing a study with some work with the Behavior Change Institute to measure how much litter happens at bus stops and shelters, to provide an intervention that basically is a sign that has a particular message in it that lets them know that somebody else has to clean up after them if they are littering, and then measuring post-intervention. And we are looking at bus shelters where we are making that intervention and bus shelters where we're not, and seeing which types of signs and which types of messages resonate the most, so that we can then replicate and scale that up. And what I would offer to everyone who is watching is that as we develop those results, we will be happy to share all of those things, including the icons, the designs, the graphics, et cetera, with the broader network, to see if others can pick it up and run with it in their own respective cities and counties.
That would be great. Put me on the list. So Michelle, can you talk a little bit more about this idea of what our audience members can do to really bring about change within their own communities?
Well, let's see. Where do I begin? I think that there are the Center for Community Progress, right, Mark, has collected so many useful resources. I highly recommend checking in with them, because they have ideas about, how to fund, for example, some of these initiatives. I know in Youngstown, the community reuse version or option was funded with block grants, so federal block grants, in addition to this, that, and the other thing, which is usually how it goes, right? As opposed to in Philadelphia, the cleaning and greening program is funded almost entirely by the city's general fund, with some contribution from the housing department. And so, thinking about, so there are resources out there in terms of how to get something like this off the ground, where would the funding come from? And I know, and I should mention, the Forest Service has been a partner in some of these litter prevention and or cleanup campaigns. So I actually, there's a Keep Southeast Ohio Beautiful partnership that the Forest Service and that local, national forest there helped to manage, which built, it's pretty cool, this big, I don't know, it's a van or a bus full of equipment that community members can check out, basically can borrow, to help them support their own community, neighborhood cleanup efforts. So that's pretty cool. It's on wheels, and yeah, I mean, it's like a library of all the tools that you need. Things like this to support residents in taking care and upkeeping their own communities and neighborhoods, which hopefully will have a sort of a long-term, it will stick, right? Once people figure out and see the results of their own efforts and figure out how to work together to do it, that these things are long-lasting, long-term. And And so, you know, there are so many opportunities to measure these types of things. And I've got, you know, we have stories and case studies of and all of these things and always you know, my bias is to try to scale it up or to be able to measure it and throw some statistics at it and give these, you know, big numbers out, right? So this is my bias, but we also need those stories and case studies and clearinghouses like the Center for Community Progress are really good at doing that, collecting some of those stories, case studies, and reporting out about those things.
If I could just build on that, I'm sorry, Jacqueline.
Please. No, I was going to ask you to. Perfect timing.
Okay. We actually worked with the Center for Community Progress and did a survey, a national survey of basically land bank programs and other vacant land reuse organizations. We have about 130 people, I think, in the or organizations in the study. They've created some resources from that, and we're doing these case studies that Michelle's involved in them, case studies of some of those that did the most kind of engagement of community, engagement of kids, and engagement of multi-sectoral efforts. I just want to so you can go to our website or their website to get the it's a best practices guide on that, for example, that we collaborated writing on that. But I also want, you know, we've had people raise questions about the work that we are also talking about. So let me be the academic here for a minute and sort of some of the downsides. One is we often get the question of, well, if you've cleaned up this street and there's less crime, doesn't it go somewhere else? Don't you just displace it? We've done some analyses best we can. Others have done the same. Some of our colleagues, Michelle and others, we've done best we can, and we're not finding that to be the case. It really does seem to erase it. And part of the evidence is that there's a secular trend in the city, perhaps, of going, for example, of crime going down, but it goes down more when community engaged. So just want to caution about that and pay attention to that. Another side of this is, you know, we talked about the structural factors that have created lots of this vacancy and these vacant lots that exist in our cities. And now we're talking about, I don't want to shift the responsibility to the residents then being responsible for cleaning it up and making it better. It is not their responsibility. But we are finding when they do take on that responsibility, it sticks and it has more sustainability and is more building of a busy street and a community. So having said that, we have to be very conscious, I think, that it isn't the citizens alone, but it is the partnerships. It is the resources that can be brought to bear by cities. I noticed sanitation company, the sanitation departments, the mayor's office, city council, engaging resources to help communities achieve that and to help build communities, help build celebratory events for them. Maybe support if they wanted to create an empty lot into a playground and providing the resources for that. So we can't have created these structures that created this concentrated and non-random vacancy and then turn around and say it's your responsibility to clean it up. Why don't you clean it up? It's bigger than any individuals. It's part of the solution. It is not the whole solution. So I want to be careful not to blame the victims here for the situation that they might find themselves in. So I just want to point those two important facts out there. And you asked a long time ago about the idea of litter, and I think about it as a snowball coming down a hill. It builds, it grows, and so thinking about a little bit of litter builds into more litter and builds into all the things that we've been talking about. So litter is almost the tip of the iceberg of what can happen if you don't nip it in the bud, if you don't pay attention to it. But it can get much worse than that.
Do you mind if I add one thing?
No, please do.
I don't want to cut off.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to also say that something we observed and heard from residents in neighborhoods where this clean and green intervention was happening, that for some, you know, while the vacancy and all the litter and all the overgrown weeds and whatever is stressful and it provokes anxiety and depression, all these things, having somebody come and clean it up and come and mow it can also provoke anxiety regarding gentrification, eventual displacement, you know, that these benefits are not for us, it's for whoever the other people are that you're trying to attract to this neighborhood. So right, I mean, it's important to keep that in mind as well, and perhaps that having the community have ownership over and say over what happens where is really an important aspect to any kind of cleanup efforts.
Thank you for saying that, Michelle. I mean, that's exactly right. The antidote for me is exactly what you said. Community engagement. That's the positive side of community engagement, community ownership, community defining what's going to happen in that space.
Jeremy, can you add to this idea of co-creation, and also any tips on how to engage with local partners, whether it be governmental partners or corporate partners? What are some tips for our audience?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Michelle and Mark just said, one of the things that we have found in Indianapolis is, particularly if we are taking a vacant lot or other abandoned space and turning it into a neighborhood green space, we take our cues from the neighbors who live there. So if it is an older neighborhood and they just want to see a pollinator garden and maybe with a little walking path, that's great. If it's a younger neighborhood that wants a seesaw and something that's a little bit more active, we create that. And so we don't predetermine or prejudge what that green space ought to look like. We do that with full input and influence from the neighborhood that is there. Sometimes they want things that we can't provide, and so we sometimes can leverage relationships that we have with other nonprofits and with the city and so forth. But so we don't build basketball courts, for example, at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, and sometimes that's something that the neighborhood would love to have. But to the extent that we can co-create something that is desired by the neighborhood is a prime way that we move forward in a constructive way. I think the other thing that we are really engaging on in Indianapolis is this idea of the town hall meeting, and trying to have town hall meetings in different parts of the city with different stakeholders to really gather the information that is most important and understand the things that they value the most, and then see what we can bring to make a difference. So it is about that co-creation. And I will tell you that there are plenty of people that we can email that either aren't online because they don't have a computer, or just never check an email inbox like that. And yet there may be someone like a Mrs. Jones who's lived on the same house for 50 years, and she's always on her front stoop, and everybody in the neighborhood knows her, and she has influence in that neighborhood. And we need to find the ways to meet her, and she might not be mobile or might not have a car. And so it is trying to figure out, where is the location where we can have that? What is the time of day that we can have that kind of a conversation? Do we need to provide things like childcare or bus fare or a meal, so that we can get the right people around the table and that we are not excluding anyone? And that is really going to be an important part of building these authentic relationships, making sure that we are doing right by the different neighborhoods throughout the city. We have 99 different named neighborhoods in Indianapolis, and so there are a lot of places to go, and they're not all the same. So it is important for us to think about those different ways of engagement. And to the points that Michelle and Mark were making, we can't do it alone. We can't just sort of drop in and do one cleanup. I did see that there was one note in here about how do we transition from picking up litter that has happened to preventing the act of littering in the first place. And so I'm hopeful that some of the research that we find from working with the Behavior Change Institute will shed some more light on that, at least from our parochial perspective. But I also think that that there's going to be more work that we can do to try to get people to stop that actual act. And to Mark's point, is it because they're already in a place where there is a lot of litter and they say, all right, well, what's one more empty cup? Or are there other interventions that we can do that will involve the right set of influencers or stakeholders to make a cleaner street the norm as opposed to the exception?
So Mark, what are you seeing in terms of behavior change? How can we educate people about the importance of environment? And actually, I'm looking at questions in the chat box as well. I'll take it a step further. Someone asked, how do you do that in a time of COVID? So.
Well, yeah, and there was another one. How do you motivate a really disadvantaged group, a community, whatnot? Well, at the risk of sounding like a commercial, we've created this program called Youth Empowerment Solutions, where we were charged by the funder to do community change effort to prevent youth violence. And I don't want to be too negative here, but we did spin it around in a different way. And what we said was, well, let's engage the kids in the solution rather than be the focus of the problem. And so I think, to me, one of the strategies is to engage kids. Almost everybody agrees that kids are the innocents in many ways. And I think engaging kids, we've found that when kids were working on making this lot a community garden, people would drive by and say, and would bring water, said, you look like you need some water. People would drive by and sort of just like honk. They would go to the garden store to get the plants, and the garden store said, what's it for? And they gave it to them for free. Same with the tools. And we had budget to pay for them anyway, but they said, take it, you're doing too much good work. So I think there's something to the infection of doing positive things. And so this Youth Empowerment Solutions, I think by seeing kids out there doing stuff, there is it has a positive effect on what other people do. And we've had people say that, like in the example I gave earlier. So I think we need to work with our structures that have resources, like a land bank, and think about ways to begin to engage some groups, make it public, and then other groups hopefully will see that they can too. And I think that's a start in terms of getting people engaged in the process. There was one other thing I wanted to say and I forgot it because I know it was Jeremy. Sometimes old people like to have seesaws and playgrounds nearby because they have grandchildren. I'm just saying. I don't have grandchildren yet, but I'm just saying.
And with that, Michelle, anything you can add to this discussion around behavior change and really how are you engaging people or communicating to them, educating them about the importance of environment, particularly during this time of COVID? What's working?
Yeah, so the question that I saw in the chat about, well, so how do we actually prevent the litter, in the first place? And I mean, my answer is very much similar to Mark's. The theory anyway is that it's sort of the reverse broken windows. If we clean an environment, that it will no longer attract more litter or trash, and so that it actually is or could be considered a prevention measure or approach. Yeah, right. So engaging communities, and then I did want to say, it's about measurement. The fact is that I wish I could say more, based on my research, blah blah blah, but we don't tend to measure litter accumulation, um, uh, as well, that's not true. We do have some parcel observation information, data collection, right? But in this experimental study that I mentioned, we weren't necessarily tracking the amount, quantity, characteristics of litter during, before the intervention versus after. It was we just measured, did it get treated? Did it get cleaned and green versus no? And I would say that it would take funding and specific research questions, tying, litter, trash accumulation to public health outcomes, for us to be able to collect this data. So something that we haven't talked about is that it costs a lot of money to go out and survey and do these surveys about litter and trash. Where is it? And just doing it once, well, that's great. So we can compare this area versus that area. But what we need over time, we need data over time and everywhere. I mean, again, my bias is I want to throw my statistics at it. To get some numbers. So we want to know, over time, we need more money to collect this data over time and systematically in every city or other areas where it matters. Yet the funding is just not there for it. And where should it come from? Well, for one, what we're trying to argue here is that it's a determinant of health and of health disparities, in all of its different dimensions, so violence, stress, and that's related to cardiovascular disease and et cetera, et cetera. It matters, and so shouldn't the big funders like the National Institutes of Health or NSF or shouldn't they be investing in research that addresses litter and my bias, my answer, I guess it's a rhetorical question, but I think that more and better funding for questions that link these things, these environmental conditions to health and health outcomes will help us better understand, how to prevent it, and does the prevention have, what sort of impact does it have on public health?
Thank you, Michelle. That's great. And Keep America Beautiful does measure the litter that you're describing, the before and after. So I would love to talk with you after this session. I think there's a lot we can do together. Jeremy, we've got 1 minute left. Any point you want to say to wrap up? And then I have to very quickly say goodbye to everyone with a brief closure.
I would just add that I think that we have some good fortune at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful to have spent some time on creating these GIS layers of our city and working with a Behavior Change Institute. And while we've been able to do that with support from the city itself here, I know that not everyone on the network has the same access to similar resources, but I will be happy to share those resources. Some of them are research that is ongoing that we don't have answers yet, but we'll share that. And others are things that we'll be able to share immediately after this webinar with folks that are interested.
Great. Thank you to all of you. This was a fantastic discussion. We're very grateful. And I've seen a lot of comments in the chats and people just really praising. So thank you for all the information. Thank you for your time. And just in closing, I'd like to say, I know we talked about cleaning and greening public spaces and the significant impact it has on the health and well-being of communities. And with this, we see that engaging people from all corners of the community to participate in the solution can have a tremendous impact and positive impacts on not only beautifying communities, but unifying communities. And so I think we can deduce that if we clean and green local communities across the country, we can truly transform the nation. And so as we sign off today, I hope that everyone in the audience will feel empowered to take action, to really connect with the different people in your community, the different organizations within your communities, to really join all of us in achieving this goal of cleaning and greening America, and doing so by beautifying and unifying communities across the country. So please feel free to seek out more information on KAB.org, and please join us for the next webinar on recycling in the fall. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
You're all
Thank you.
pleasure. What a pleasure. Thank you. Bye now.